this one. I'm not sure if the recording is running, but just give me a heads up because I just see my screen.
It's running.
It's running
Okay,
right now.
awesome. Excellent. Thanks. So, welcome everyone. I'm just going to give a brief overview today how the governance and prime rating works at present. So I have to say we are currently working on kind of revamping the whole incentive system as a whole, so it might change in the future. And maybe at the end, we can also go a little bit more in detail into that direction. But I'm going to show you the, I think, main primitives that also will stay with the new system. And without further ado, I'm going to give a brief introduction of what prime rating actually is. And actually, one more note, I saw a lot of people from Prime actually within in this call. So if I should forget anything, mess anything up, feel free to interrupt me. And also, if anyone has any questions during the call or something's not clear, just interrupt me, and I'm happy to clarify. Okay, so what is prime rating actually, or like what does prime rating do? Like I would say it's a permissionless incentive system to incentivize the evaluation of the quality and risk of Web3 projects. And we do this by collecting on-chain and off-chain data and interpreting this information in form of reports. And these reports you can find on our website, which I put a screenshot here on the left, where we essentially assign a rating which is made out of technical and a fundamental score. So the technical we get from DeFi Safety, the fundamental as an in-house framework. I think someone raised their hand. Just please talk because I cannot accept or not accept. So please go ahead. And if not, if I misheard, then I'm just going to continue.
Yeah, please continue. I think there was some issue with microphone on some
Okay, cool. So we do this by applying a community-curated open source research framework, as I was mentioning. So this is the fundamental framework that I'm referring here to. Why is it community-curated? Because it can be amended by the community, and it's open source. It's available on our GitHub or Gitbook, and we maintain this whole system through a gamified, essentially a leveling system, to which I will come in a second. So what is the objective really? Like, what are we trying to do from a product perspective? And I'm trying to highlight this here, this explicitly, because I think this is the whole thing that often gets forget, especially for, I think, like service-driven DAOs, is like, what are we actually trying to do? Because it's not about the tokenomics. The tokenomics are there to support the product, in my opinion. And the same with the governance. Like, what are we actually doing? So I think the key objective is really the high-quality, reliable, insightful, fundamental analysis reports that we are producing. This is our product. So how does prime rating work? So we have two tokens. So we have a two-token system. So we, on one side, have RXP, which is a non-transferable token, which essentially is given to raters as soon as they do useful work within this incentive, or like as soon as they do useful work in our system, essentially. So this is either for submitting a report or for reviewing at present. And the other D2D token is currently used as a pure reward token. And this, like I highlighted this in this way because in the future system, this will change. So I'm sure a lot of you already get a lot of ideas of what could be done differently. So the idea, I think, like we have different levels which define essentially the functional role you hold within this protocol or within our system. So we essentially are a merit-based system. because we rely on the experience of more experienced raters to say, okay, something's valid or it's not valid. And this is really where this non-transferable RXP token is really helpful, because you start at a level 0. So this is open to anyone. Anyone can join our community. Then after 25 RXP, in the new system 30 RXP, you become a novice and you gain essentially just an NFT badge at present. And as you level up, you get more rewards, as well as additional roles. So with a graduate, for instance, you can become a reviewer. So now you not only can write reports as a rater, but you can also review reports because you have sufficient experience. And this continues like with the master, where you unlock the governor skill. And Grandmaster and Legend at the moment, these two levels only give you additional rewards, which might change as well, or likely to change, very likely to change in the future. So like, how does the Prime rating system work? So I'm just going to go over the product, or like the process, and give you a little bit of an overview of the whole system works. So now you saw the different individual components. So how do we get different roles? And now I just want to show a quick overall picture. And for this, I quickly have to exit the presentation, or might actually work in here. I think this is fine. So we start here with the rater. The rater picks a project from, at present, a token list, which is then where he writes the first version of the report. The reviewer reviews this report. The rater integrates the feedback. So the the expectation that we have to the reviewer is essentially giving a second opinion, giving a different view, as well as like input with regards to the framework, and also guidance of, does it make sense according to the criteria we laid out in the framework? Like, does it fit with the scoring, or is it off? Stuff like this. The rater has the opportunity to pass the report back to the reviewer to get a second opinion, to be sure that it passes the governor vote. And then the reviewer integrates the second feedback, which produces the final report. The final report is then submitted to governor vote, which then essentially accepts or rejects the report. And once it's accepted, then it will go into the actual Prime rating, into the actual rating score that you see on the web page. Exactly, and here mostly what you see is how the overall picture looks like. So we would write these reports, and a lot of these, or like the API exists, but other products don't exist at the moment, would generate revenue, which would then reward ideally the different protocol roles. And this is kind of how the overall, let's say, system looks like. So moving on, what governance processes do we have right now? And that's why I also introduced in the beginning really the objective, because they heavily focus around the actual product right now. So because we're still quite small, and as we gradually increase, I would argue, we will also develop processes, or probably copy actually other DAOs that do this successfully, like other processes that just manage administrative functions such as hiring, finance, where you probably just spin up a sub-DAO that is responsible for this in particular. So what do we have in existing governance processes? So we have a RAP, which is a report acceptance proposal. So this is what where the governance really vote into existence the report into the framework. We have a RUP, which is a report update proposal, which is just a slimmed down version from the RAP, because sometimes, you know, a protocol might not have many changes, but the report is resubmitted. So that's where this makes sense, because it's a slimmed down version. Then we have a tip, and this is, I think, like later to this a little bit more, but I think this is a really crucial part actually, because it allows the amendment of the framework that we use. And I think if this is done right and community driven, you essentially capture what Prime rating as a community thinks is fundamental value, because fundamental value is subjective, right? Like what is it? It's like, nobody knows, but essentially I would say it's like agreed upon, like you agree as a group, okay, this has value, this has not value. You can sometimes make some sort of evaluation, especially if there's like revenue involved, like protocol revenue. It's probably the new metric, right? Then you can make some sort of evaluation, but generally speaking, I would say it's always a shared story. And how do you capture this? And I think it's only possible through kind of debate. And I think the tip, so allowing the amendment of the actual framework we use to assess projects, is super powerful in this. And then there's RDR, because obviously mistakes happen, and it's important to add or like amend reports that have been submitted to fix errors or crucially missing information of protocols. So we had that in the past where protocols came to us, said, hey, like this report, there's actually this and this missing. This is really important and would change something. And that's how this developed. Are these processes perfect? Probably not, but I think it's, again, an iterative process, and it will take time to lay these all out. And but it's a start, and I think it shows the general ideas that we are thinking about, and I think future iterations will make this more effective. So again, just a little bit more detail on the actual parameters of these different governance processes. So how does this the RAP lifecycle look like? So we have currently, and I admit it's not a finished Web3 stack infrastructure. So there's still a lot of I'd say centralized components, quite frankly. And the reason for this, I think, is, and why I actually think it still makes sense, is essentially right now, just getting the incentive system right, like how much is a report worth, how much is a review worth, all this stuff has to be figured out, and it's just easier if you can amend it faster. And we do have a roadmap and stuff like that, or there's a roadmap in the making for like future iterations. But essentially how it works, coming back to the actual point. So we have a type form, and essentially you submit that you have written this report, and it's now ready for governors to look at it. So you submit this, a dedicated governor will then check the formatting of the report and check whether it's correct, upload it to IPFS, put it up for snapshot. After this added to snapshot, the other governors will be informed that there's a vote happening. So this is right now happening through Discord with a Discord bot. Then the RAP is queued for 72 hours. Once the vote has passed, it's implemented into the it's carried out by Prime governors or stewards that upload the actual report onto the webpage. And the voting specifications are, so like only RXP holders can vote, right? So we, as I mentioned earlier, we have governors who need to have 200 RXP. At the present, at least one governor needs to accept the report. So this is also something that really changes in the new system. And for a vote to pass, 51% or like 50.1% at least have to be achieved. And the vote obviously can happen all the time, like all year round. So a tip, I mentioned before what it is. It's a template improvement proposal. So this follows a slightly different framework. And actually, one last thing on the last side, it's the same for the RUP, right? Like there were two different processes, RUP and RUP. They exactly function the same way, because the RUP is just a slimmed down version. Sorry, just for completeness. So the tip is a template improvement proposal. And the life cycle for this is essentially you would start an informal discussion, just a sentiment check, which usually happens within the forum or in Discord. Like usually, the true process, I would say, usually a rater raises actually a question, says, hey, how do I answer XYZ? Like this doesn't make sense or something like that. And then a discussion around that starts quite naturally within our community. And it's driven by an actual, I would say, usually a use case, because you suddenly have a case, like you evaluate protocol and suddenly, oh no, the governance section doesn't make sense. Like it's a good model, but it would score badly in the fundamental score. And like through these things, the actual issue comes up, and then a debate happens, which is then usually not like a sentiment check as such is not often needed, and then is formalized in on the forum where it's a little bit further discussed and refined. We have a dedicated template for this, where you would then just outline essentially why do you want to change it, how do you want to change it. Then after posting it, you would inform other raters and reviewers about the forum submission. Like everyone will give their input. There will be 48 hours for as minimum discussion period. Usually it lasts longer, I would say, from my experience thus far. If there is sufficient discussion, like if there's like you usually reach this point where no new inputs come in, like the soft consensus, I would say. And after that, you essentially create or formalize this tip on a snapshot, where it's then again up for 72 hours. And once it passes, a governor or steward will actually amend the template that we have on our website for raters to use to evaluate projects. And that's how this changes essentially. The voting specification, it's the minimum of 50 RXP is participated to vote. So there's also a question, like is this the right parameter? I think, like, to be perfectly honest, sometimes it's a little bit magic numbers, like, because who knows what the right value is, right? Like it's a lot of experimentation. That's why I think, especially in like early days, we should not get, especially if you are trying new concepts. I think it's really important to stay flexible and then start formalizing and making these processes uncorruptible. So that's my personal take. I'm happy to debate this also later if someone feels differently. So the quorum is 25% of the circulating RXP. To pass, it needs 51% for 4 votes. Voting cap, it can happen all year round. However, usually it takes 1 to 2 weeks to implement, so it's usually not recommended to do around a season or a rateathon, which are 2 events where we specifically focusing on, like, for instance, an area like the metaverse to rate protocols in this category. So there's implementation rounds usually at the end of each quarter, essentially just to not collide with the mentioned seasons as well as rateathons. And the RDR, so the report dispute resolution process, is outlined here. And actually, Salome is in the call, or I saw her earlier. I'm not sure if she still is. So this was pioneered by her. And so if I should get anything wrong, she can definitely correct me. So essentially what happens is there's a RDR request. So this can be started, I believe, from any protocol. There's a discussion phase, then the governor set up the RDR, like the RDR or snapshot, where it goes into a voting period again, like the 72 hours that we always have if the dispute claim is correct. The fundamental report will be resubmitted. This means it will also go through the whole voting process again. And if the Yeah, and if the dispute claim is false, essentially nothing happens or a new process has to be started. The voting specifications, again, RXP, a minimum of 100 RXP is required to vote. So I think like the rationale behind here is that it's often for new orators, it's quite difficult to actually make a judgment on this. And so we just want to have a little bit more familiarity with the framework, because you could have cases where maybe a score is actually disputed. Like sometimes it's also just pure information incorrectness, but sometimes it could also be something like, okay, like the score is way off or something and it passed governor vote, but actually this can't be right. And then you need this minimum understanding of how does our framework actually work. So that's why it's set to, like, I believe the reviewer level. So at least one governor has to accept it. So 200 RXP, 50.1 participating votes need to vote for, and the vote can happen all year round. So it always can be challenged. Okay, so I'm gonna actually pause here for a second because I think this is kind of like what we have right now. And I can also go, like if there's question about other functions, happy to answer that. But I think like this is what we have right now. And if there's still time, interest, can also think, like present a little bit, like a few concepts, what we're thinking about, where this whole thing can be going potentially. So yeah, like I would see if there's any question right now and then go on.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you for the presentation. So anyone from the audience have any questions to the current process of prime rating?
And please be critical, like come and rip us apart.
So I might have actually some, and maybe someone will check later. So you have this, if I'm correct, you have like two types of reports. One is like technical report and one is like governance report. But if I understand correctly, like the processes for governance for the reports are just like generic for both reports. Is that correct?
So the way it currently works is because we have the DeFi, like for the technical report part, we have actually a partnership with DeFi Safety, so it's entirely handled actually by them, and we just combine the score. So right now it is that we mostly focus on the fundamentals. So we look at the value proposition, tokenomics, the team, governance, and regulatory. Whereas the technical, so smart contract risk, is assessed by DeFi Safety, who have their own process.
Okay, that makes sense. And from that perspective, can you as a DAO or like also dispute their kind of results, or you need to just accept whatever they send it?
That's a really good point. I think like for now, actually, I would say I love that point, by the way. It's something I probably haven't paid enough appreciation to, or haven't thought of enough about. But it's something we have no process in place, I think. Like you could challenge it within their Discord, but there's no such thing as, oh, you say, okay, this is wrong, and you can come to us. So like that's, I would say, just a missing process, but that's awesome. So thanks for challenging this.
Yeah, so basically it works like Oracle. You just accept whatever the Oracle
we do
says.
accept, yeah. But then again, like we also like initially this DeFi Safety and Prime Rating were like very, very close. So it's kind of like we're familiar with their work. Like we know what they're doing, and it's not like we just say, oh, like it's not like we taking from CoinGecko like the safety score or something, you know.
Mm-hmm. So my another question. Okay, I see Chirag want to ask questions, so I will wait with mine. Chirag, go on.
Hey Pankar, hi. Hey Thomas, hi. Thanks. A great presentation. Just one small question. So you showed a chart where you said there are multiple levels of contributors, and at each level, if you contribute, you earn something, right? So and then each level is defined by a certain number of tokens. So if you hold those number of tokens, then you qualify to become that level of contributor. That's correct, right? I got that chart right.
Yes, essentially you unlock a new skill. Like you can
Right.
take a different role in the protocol. Yeah.
Right. But what I also realized was that the number of tokens you need to kind of unlock a new level is way higher than what you would earn if you were to deliver that service in the earlier level, right? So are you kind of incentivizing users to buy those tokens to move on to the next level? Is that the intent there?
No,
Because
so
typically, yeah.
no, just to clarify, right? Like these levels are unlocked, as you see here, is like requirement RXP. So the RXP is the reputation token. So this is something you can't buy. This
Oh,
is,
okay.
you earn this by either doing a review or writing a report. So this is sweat that you have to put into. It's not purchasable.
So the report said once you do a report, you get 10 RXPs, right? But the next level is
Yeah.
around 50 RXPs or something. So the idea is you have to do 5 reports and then only you move on to the next level. So that in kind of you
Essentially.
kind of maintain the number of effort by that stacking.
Yes, the more, if you do a certain number of reports, yeah, you unlock a new level.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Perfect. Makes sense. Thank you.
So I actually have a follow-up question on that, because non-transferable tokens are not that common, let's say, in the governance. So what was your kind of overall experience with like introducing this experience tokens and like not able to kind of be transferable actually? Like what the community kind of, how they react, what they appreciate maybe about it, what they saw like as a downside?
So I should maybe elaborate also a little bit on this RXP token. So it's quite a special token actually, and I should have probably mentioned this in the beginning. And please don't ask me about the smart contract specs because I don't know exactly how this works, but it was developed by, I believe, Luke, a couple of other people. So Luke, the founder of Prime.xyz. But essentially, it's a token that you can also withdraw again. So how we do this is by essentially using the multisig and saying batch mint or batch burn. So, and I'm going to answer the question in a second, but it's essentially, we can also withdraw it. Right now, we don't do this. But in later functions, this will also, like in probably in the iteration of the system, there probably will also be a removal of that introduced, because and I think this makes sense in a way, because we're talking about skill, right? You learn and you forget, which is just like unavoidable, and the token itself doesn't hold value. It does affect you, like your earnings, but it doesn't hold value. And I think you can play around with this really interestingly, and I think, like, I haven't seen this in any other DAO, to be honest, but I think this is something really cool. And I would imagine actually that this is something like that for this use case makes a lot of sense. Coming back to the actual question, like how does the community react or has reacted? So, I mean, I think this really has been in the place since the beginning. So everyone who joined the system opted in to be subject to this RXP thing, or like RXP token. So I think generally there was never really a conflict. I think, yeah, I think generally I personally like it. And maybe to give you my backstory, I started as a contributor. So I wasn't always on the core team. I was writing reports myself, and then gradually started contributing also to things beyond research. Yeah, so, and I personally really like the system because I think it makes sense. I don't know if I fully answered your question.
Yeah, kind of like I think I'm pleasantly surprised, not surprised, but like I think I like to hear that like the community actually likes the system, because I believe the current governance system would be having other DAOs, like the tokens transferable, and then large token holders usually owns all the like voting power in the way that they have more like capital to actually afford it. In this way, like you need to build up your score. So that leads me to another question. Was this token also distributed to like core team members and founders just for their like contribution to the product, or did they have to also like submit the reports and build it up?
Okay,
So
I think I need to
how the
really.
core basically how the core team it's actually included in the governance? Like, are they participating in the governance or not?
Again, like an amazing question. So I think in the beginning, a lot of people actually wrote reports. I think at some point you could also earn RXP for like different research work. So for instance, if you would help to actually build one of the frameworks or something like that. I think under the new system, we're actually pivoting away from this completely. And I think this makes sense because as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a merit-based system. So the person with the relevant skill should be eligible for the governance function, in my opinion, like for the given governance function. So this doesn't work obviously for each use case, but I think in this use case where you have experts or ideally experts, I think it makes a lot of sense. So having said this, what will happen in the future? So right now we just have RXP, right? Some core team members also have some RXP. Some got this by earlier, let's say, other contributions towards the actual assessment of the frameworks. Like, so for instance, as I mentioned, the building frameworks. But in my opinion, this doesn't really make sense. I think it should be really exclusively for report writing and reviewing. And I would even go further. And I think like this is at least in the incentive revamp group that we have been working on. I think this is actually quite accepted. It should fractal down into different categories as well as domains, right? So for instance, if I have 100 RXP in DeFi, should I also be an expert in the metaverse? Probably not, right? So you can just break down this RXP into different domains. And I think this is where the direction will go and where I personally think Prime rating will go, that we break down essentially into sub-DAOs that focus on a certain theme, have then these communities forming. So for instance, we have a metaverse lending market sub-DAO that has its specific RXP and can introduce the system. And I think through that you get like a really cool coverage, but maybe we'll see. Maybe there's a catch to this. And I think especially if you then come back to like more aggregated, like more aggregated decisions, how do you integrate this back in? And like what are the attack vectors? I don't fully understand that yet, but I think this is the direction we definitely should go, like specialize RXP. And then you can also introduce stuff like, okay, should there be something for the core team, like operational RXP or like HR RXP? And I think that's I don't know, like that's what I've been thinking about.
No, this is super interesting. And actually, we might have next week someone talking about kind of forkability of DAOs. And you might have read this article, which has been published a few weeks ago. I think it's called Go Fork Yourself. Blogbo, is that correct?
I think I haven't actually read it, but I saw it and someone shared it in the Telegram group, right?
Yeah, it is called Go Fork Yourself.
Yeah,
and
I think, yeah, check it out. I think this is interesting concept. Like, let's not build like super DAOs, which are like super large and do everything, but rather like enable to basically for the DAOs to like the minimum kind of product which they can focus on, and they can really like then like agree and something. So that's a really interesting concept, and I like that kind of way of thinking. So are you actually enabling this, like the like forking your model for other DAOs or like sub DAOs in your system, or is it something what they need to like develop on their own?
I mean, right now, I think the system is just not forkable because the infrastructure is not in place. So I think like we right now still have to kind of balance the reward system, but I think in the long term for sure, because I think that's in general like the beauty about the space, like the forkability, because it allows people to have a choice to opt out if they want to. And I think choice, just generally speaking, can be quite powerful or empowering to the individual. But so to answer the question succinctly, because I tend to talk too much, so apologies for that. Essentially, short term, I think no, but not for, oh, we want to keep it private, but just because the system isn't there yet. Long term, yes.
Excited about that. I think that will be a great thing to fork or copy and use. It seems like your system, thanks to I think also thanks to nature of the product, works very well. So maybe last question from my side. I saw you have the quorum on like those proposals, and like that to pass it needs to be at least 50%. Do you have currently like any issue with engagement, or like basically everyone who holds RXP basically participated in the governance?
No, we definitely have issues, but I think in part it's also because, like as I mentioned, we're working right now on kind of looking at the incentive layer of the system so that all stakeholders are incentivized, right? So right now, like because it gradually grew, so to maybe give also a backstory of the development, started with like obviously a couple of people that were trusted, that were just being paid, and then gradually people came in. But in the beginning, governors were essentially trusted entities, so that were voting stuff in that, and it was believed like that they could be trusted, right? So they weren't actually paid or were paid through other means. So for instance, they were on the payroll of Prime.xyz, and then would just get paid their monthly salary and would do this as like kind of a side job. So what we're doing right now in the revamp is incentivizing also governors. So including them into protocol, or like for instance, giving them a share for each passing report. And I think this is going to be really interesting. I can go into a little bit into what we have thinking, like, or what we are thinking about. So I think there's multiple steps to this as well. But yeah, like it should be something that's self-sustaining, so that the revenue that comes in from the product should then also go to them. And maybe because I think it's going to be like it is interesting to you guys, but initially it's probably going to be still somewhat well, not centralized, but I think not scalable. So we probably what will happen is everyone who has more than 200 RXP in our community can let themselves be elected, and then we have kind of this governing council, and then you can play around with incentives. That you say, okay, so you get rewarded X amount per reward per report, but it's only conditionally paid out if you participate in 75 of the votes. We can do something like, okay, we essentially count each governor would get rewarded for each vote. So let's say we have 4 governors, they all would get 150, so we have a pot of 600, but only 3 participate. Then we could split this pot of 600 across these 3, and the not participating one loses out. I'm personally never a friend of paying for voting. Like I get a little bit nervous in this, and I think it's to be seen if this actually works out as we intend. Because I think as soon as you pay for governance participation, you get participation, but not necessarily quality. And quality is here extremely important. But I think given that these people have worked their way up to 200 RXP, they somewhat staked or put a lot of time and sweat into Prime DAO or Prime Rating. I believe that we might not run into this issue, but it's to be seen, and I don't know. But it's something we definitely have to monitor once we implement like the new system.
It's amazing. I agree with you on that, because I think like paying for vote is just give you really the vote. However, it won't give you opinions. It won't give you other stuff on that. There are probably ways how to incentivize like quality contribution, but yeah, like simple POAP or something won't solve it.
Yeah.
I think yeah, we are aligned there. So actually, just like I am mindful that we have only 15 minutes and we wanted to talk also about the future, but anyone from the audience have maybe some question to Thomas or what we have discussed?
I have a question. I just want to clarify that. You mentioned earlier about the governor going to incentive from the project pay vote for. So it seemed to me it would have sort of a conflict of interest because I thought it's the DAO should pay for the governor vote for the proposal, rather than the governor is sort of benefits from the proposal itself. It's gonna create a motivation that the governor really want to vote for this proposal, want to become effective because he gonna benefits from it. So if that's the case, or maybe I misunderstand you earlier.
So okay, let me just see if I got this right. Essentially, you're saying paying the governor per report would incentivize him for okay, like maybe okay, okay. Let me see if I got it right. So essentially, moving the governor away from the payroll would lead to the incentive that they would change the incentive structure, because when the governor is now being paid per report, he's incentivized to essentially get as many reports through as he can, or like, because I think there might be the misunderstanding. Or like, wait, can you clarify again? I just want to be sure that I answer the question correctly.
Yeah, I just want to know that where is the source to pay for the governor? Is that the DAO itself, or is the project, or behind the report?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So it would be the DAO itself. So how it would work, to go back to this is the idealized example, because right now this is obviously not balanced. But we have these different products. They would pay into the DAO treasury, and then the DAO treasury would pay for each of the protocol functions. So if that makes sense. And maybe one thing to add, like even if the governor now gets paid, they are paid to vote, like they paid regardless whether they vote yes or no, if that makes sense. Like as long as they participate.
Yeah. Yes, that makes sense now. So it's basically governor is paid for the quantity of the voting rather than the passing of the voting.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. Also, I just wonder if there's any other background materials we can find anywhere for this, because I feel like it's very interesting.
Good question. I'm not 100% sure. Like definitely check out our Git book, but there's mostly still the old documentation, so of the old system in there, and it's a lot has changed. The other place you can visit if you specifically want to look at Prime rating is, I think, our forum, where we have like some discussions going on. I think that's quite informative as well. And I'm happy to share this presentation as some resources of what we are thinking about. I mean, I shared it already, but I have to be honest, like off the top of my head, for instance, if you're talking about like academic literature or something of that sort, I wouldn't have anything at my up my sleeve essentially. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Perfect. So let's go to the future.
Okay, so the future is just a little bit, and it might get a little bit confusing. So because at the moment we're still ideating a lot, right? Like we thinking, okay, does this make sense? And some things might not make sense, and it's all still really fluid. And there's also not much that I actually added into this presentation, but I'm just going to go for it. And if it becomes unclear or something doesn't make sense, just ask. So the idea is to some extent change the function of the actual tokens, and there's also some other implications here that might make this possible or might not make it possible. But RXP, yeah, as I mentioned already, like later on, we definitely want to like see this breakdown in granularity to allow domain expertise in certain specific areas. It should be like, I mean, it's still a measurement of commitment to prime rating as well as expertise and knowledge. It also essentially defines the roles, or still defines the roles. And I think what becomes really interesting in that stage is that you can think about, hey, where can over what should RXP govern? So what I mean by this is like what processes should be controlled through this token, because I think sometimes you also get a conflict in interest by people having this token. So what I'm thinking about in particular, I think this is like one of the changes to or why does it potentially make sense to change the utility of the transferable token is if we have RXP holders both over, for instance, strategic decisions or parameters that make it easier or harder to submit a report, that might lead to like a conflict, right? So that's why it could make sense to and maybe this is also just a side comment. So probably what will happen is that prime rating might spin out of Prime DAO, and then there obviously would be a need for like, well, not obviously, but there might be a need for our own token. I mean, a token is not necessary for DAO. Like I'm definitely not a proponent of this, but yeah, I think in this sense it could make sense. And if we would have, for instance, this token, like this transferable token, the holders of that could make decisions, for instance, over over strategic decisions. So for instance, if we fractal down like now RXP, for instance, into metaverse lending RXP, should this be a sub-DAO? Should this get funded? And I think then it becomes like, yeah, you get into this, what 1KX and Peter Pan talk about, like this demand and supply, where you can fund, or where the DAO starts to focus on capital allocation. And I think then you really get into an interesting area where DAOs can really outcompete centralized entities just by scaling more rapidly and having, I think, a different incentive structure of the workforce behind it. So why would you want to hold rate if we introduce this token, right, for protocol revenue as well as maybe electing the governors that I mentioned, right? Like if we have a system where the governors, and this is a little bit controversial, but I will go into this a little bit more. So for instance, the governor vote, like, so who approves the report, could be facilitated by this rate token. And this could be, or could lead to the situation where you have whales controlling it, but it depends on how do you issue it. So the idea behind rate would be, if we would do this, would be a inflationary token. And the issuance of rate is given exclusively for protocol function. So for raters that submit a report, or for reviewers, or for governors. So and I don't know if this works out, by the way, or like if this makes sense, but if these individuals really contribute and have sweat, let's say, have earned this money, then they will accumulate most of the rate and are likely to be somewhat incentivized to not behave maliciously. And I think this mirrors a little bit like a cooperative where people really earn this ownership. I don't know, like a lot is still in the making. Kind of see 10,000 counterexamples right now shooting in my head while just speaking. But yeah, so this is something we talked about or thought about. And I can also like go in the mirror board, but I'm not sure how much time we have left. And otherwise, I can also talk a little bit about some stuff that I think is just not clear yet. But maybe I stop here as well and just leave it up for a little bit more discussion because I felt like this wasn't as clear as the rest of the presentation. I don't know if anyone has questions. I would pause here real quick and see if there are any.
So any question from the audience?
Or
Yeah.
did I lose everyone completely because I felt that was a little bit.
No, it was really informative.
Okay.
I was just kind of curious what your engagement rate was.
Engagement rate in what particular?
In terms of like people participating, like in the voting process?
Okay. You mean okay, so I mean the governor election right now is not live yet, right? So we have the different votes. It's like quite hard to say like which area we like. It's hard to generalize right now for me because we have like these different processes, right? So I couldn't tell you. I think for governor vote right now, I would say it's a fairly low participation. Just because it's not incentivized and we have to change something. So it's kind of like this like it's charity by essentially a good meaning or like trusted governors, and it's like trusted members of the DAO, which is slowly starting to change. But in terms of the others, I think we do get some participation. I couldn't tell you. Actually, I couldn't tell you. I think that's the true answer before I talk around the point.
So just to be mindful of time, we have last 2 minutes, and maybe some people need to drop, and some people already dropping before their next call. So Thomas, thank you very much for the presentation. I think I still need to better understand actually the future token, like the rate and how everything's put together. We don't have time today, but we will definitely find some time maybe in some future sessions where we can talk about more like this, let's say, how we want to implement the future governance system. And maybe we can also compare it to other systems which are already in place. And then we can have discussion on that. So I can definitely envision some another presentation. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, audience, for paying attention. Do you want to put any closing notes?
So I honestly would love to do this. So we're working right now heavily on like just finishing this up. So I'd be happy to present the future system from scratch, and also, which I think is super interesting potentially for some, how we want to implement it, like the stepwise roadmap, because usually you can't deploy these systems at once. And apart from that, I would just say, like, if you have any questions, or if you want to talk about ideas or what you think is cool, like, just reach out to me. I'm XM3ban everywhere pretty much. So on Twitter, on Discord, and Telegram. And yeah, happy to chat. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you for coming and presenting. And yeah, definitely we should do another session so you can also gather some feedback from the community on their future plans.
I love that. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Just next week,